Welcome back to the show, guys. Another episode of the Full Subjects podcast, and it is our first recording episode of 2025. Thank you again for joining us for another year and another episode and a new season because we've switched over to season 2 of the Full Subjects podcast. And again, thanks for riding along with us. Today, for our first episode of the year, we'll be talking about the December stats. So breaking everything down from the Fraser Valley, what you need to know and how it affects you. And then, we'll kind of go a little bit from there. Friendly reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute any legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. It's not intended to cause or induce breach of any existing agency agreement. And as always, if you're a weekly listener with us, make sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. We really do appreciate it. And let's get to it.
All right. Well, without further ado, no Bank of Canada announcements to talk about. Not really a lot from like an overarching kind of market perspective. I know we like to typically do that at the start of our stats episodes, but
There
what
hasn't
I
been
can
any Canada announcements you're trying to tell me?
there's not been any Bank of Canada announcements. There's been some big announcements within Canada. I think you'd have to live under a rock to not know what we're talking about here, but let's just say that we're going to have a new prime minister and we may see a new election too. So Austin and I probably aren't the best people to explain how that process works. We're hoping that we can maybe get somebody on to actually break that down a little bit more. So stay tuned for that. But
that's Roman's music, but we'll get him back on. But maybe we can chat. Maybe we can recap a little bit on that in the Cole's notes at the end of the episode. But yeah, feel free to continue.
Yeah. So Bank of Canada announcement. Nothing's happened obviously since we last met. January 29th is the first date. We'll wait and see as more information comes out. So unemployment data, inflation, those are kind of key factors to determine what we're likely to see at the end of the month. I don't have the exact days in front of me, but I believe they'll be coming out before that announcement. Betting favorite, I believe right now is probably another quarter point. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. So let's get into stats. We usually like to break this down to kind of 4 categories. So we'll do listings. We'll look at transactions, so sales, what's happening with pricing, and approximately how long is it taking for places to actually sell. So without further ado, let's look at listings. So there's 2 things we like to look at. We like to look at, okay, what new listings are we seeing on the market and how many listings are actually on the market. So first and foremost, new listings, they dropped by almost 50% in December. Now you might think, holy crap, that's a huge drop. But Austin, is that surprising to you? Because it doesn't surprise me, quite frankly.
No, the seasonally the market basically turns off for the last 2 weeks of December. There was I had, I believe, a listing or maybe 2 that we decided, hey, early in December to throw it on the market and see if we end up getting a bite before the new year. But depending on, if you were in that, 17th, 18th, 20th, and you're thinking of listing, a good chunk of people would just kind of, kick over into January to list in the first or second week here. I have another listing that just hit the market today. And that's ultimately what we decided to do, just based off of timeline and everything. First week of January, get it up. So that just hit the market today. It doesn't surprise me that we're down 50% basically on the listing front, because that's just kind of what happens.
Yeah, and then the other side of that listings is active listings, so total listings available. And that was down almost 25%. Now, a portion of that is definitely going to be due to the fact that, so when I say down, that's month over month. So December compared to November, where we saw almost a 25% decrease. Definitely a portion of that is going to be the fact that there wasn't a lot of new listings coming on the market. But I'm curious, do you think, and maybe this is more speculation than it is fact-based, that people would have taken some other listings down possibly in December?
Yeah, it's fairly common, especially if a place hasn't sold, people will take it off the market between Christmas and New Year's, and then maybe have a fresh new listing in the new year. So I wouldn't be surprised if some people took their place off the market for those reasons. It is also possible too that maybe over the holidays people change their mind, or leading up to it, maybe they're going to stay put. So that's a portion of maybe why listings came off the market. But again, I think a good chunk of it is probably just people giving it a breather and then trying again in the new year.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Interestingly enough, though, active listings were up 34% compared to last December. So that does tell a story, right? Listings are still high year over year, but compared to the month previously, they are down, which in December, that it would shock me if it wasn't down, to be honest. So yeah, just a little bit more on that. So let's look at sales. Again, not surprisingly here, number of transactions was down in December, about a 13% decrease, a little under 1,000 transactions. But again, almost 20% higher than the previous year, so December 2023. Do any of those numbers jump out at you at all?
Yeah, definitely. It feels like things picked up a little bit, as much as things are typically quieter. We had somebody get into a place and they removed subjects on the 27th of December, I believe. So kind of shopping between or a little bit after Christmas, a new home was in their stocking.
Boxing Day shopping, right?
Yeah, Boxing Day shopping, removing subjects on a new townhome. But yeah, definitely some people were still shopping and active and eager. With the last couple of Bank of Canada announcements being, a half point, I think that's started to give a little bit more momentum to the market. People are, even over the last couple of weeks, I've had more people reaching out saying, hey, I want to go check this place out that just got listed. Maybe a move's on my radar this year. So it just feels like there's a little bit of pent up demand and people eyeing things up. Like, okay, now, this spring might be the time to make a move, depending on their situation. So yeah, that doesn't really surprise me at all. From what I recall from last year, December was like super, super quiet. And then like the last week or two, that's when things started to pick up. So because that earlier part of the month was quieter, you didn't get those sales being as high. So
yeah, no, exactly. So we'll definitely see what happens in January. Of course, we'll follow up in February about that. Bold predictions here: listings will be higher in January than they were in December, and bold prediction, there probably will be more sales in January than there were in December. And I say that obviously facetiously because there's a pretty good chance that that's going to happen. Sales to active listings ratio, we like to look at that one. Still in a balanced market, so it's a little bit higher actually, 16% compared to 14% month previously. It's still a good time to buy. Active listings being down is not a bad thing. There's still lots of inventory out there. There isn't a huge demand right now, so there's still lots of opportunities out there. Would you agree, Austin?
Yeah, for sure. Some of the momentum that we've definitely seen as of recently are first-time home buyers. People that are thinking that next year will be the year that, or this year, I guess now that we're in 2025, will be the year that we get into the market. So yeah, definitely seeing a little bit more activity from that group. And ultimately, when that happens, if they're getting into the starter product, whether that be the condos and townhomes, like the more entry level stuff, that starts to give momentum so that things can move through the different asset classes.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's look at pricing. So pricing was down for the 9th straight month. So that dates back now to March of 2024. And it was down 0.5 percentage point overall. Detached, we saw a slight decrease, almost the same. Townhomes was down around 1% month over month. And then apartments were about 0.5 percentage point. Not surprising, especially in December where we're not seeing a lot of sales. We're obviously, like we mentioned about the listings, we wouldn't expect prices to jump in a month like that. Anything you want to add about that?
I think that's just normal when you're in a high inventory environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look at what else is out there, the stuff that actually moves, the buyers have a bit more power, especially if something has been sitting on the market for longer. This is what we're willing to pay. This is what we think it's worth. Yeah, that's kind of how that affects all the movement in the market. So So yeah, that doesn't really surprise me.
No, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see that shift. I don't know if we'll necessarily see an increase in January per se, but I don't suspect us to continually see prices go down. I do think we'll start to see a switch and prices will even out and or start to slowly increase again, especially with more activity. Is that fair to say? Do you agree?
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Days on market. So these are averages. So you got to kind of have to take these with a grain of salt. But detached homes taking about 6 weeks on average to sell right now. That's not a change compared to November. Townhouses, it went up a little bit, about 3 days more. Now you're looking at a little over 5 weeks. And then apartments are about 5.5 weeks, which was another additional 2 days compared to the month previously. All this really tells me is that you have to be patient. You can't expect your home to sell in 3 weeks. Like, it's more than likely it could take a month or a little bit longer. And again, these are averages. So that means some are taking longer. Some are taking months to sell. And that's not to scare anybody, but it also depends on the product you're selling. So, and not only the product, but also who's looking to buy it. If the right buyer isn't there, just because you have a great product doesn't mean you're going to sell it. So I think people just have to be realistic about their expectations. And if you're trying to move in a pinch, then not to say it's not going to happen, but just understand that it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, and with that being said, too, as much as we're talking about it getting longer and some being longer, there's also some that are moving quickly.
Right.
Now, there was a townhouse that I have listed, and within 8 or 9 days, we ended up getting an accepted offer on it. And again, you find that right buyer, or you find that person that's looking for that product, and it makes sense. People aren't afraid to necessarily make a quick move on something, but again, it just like you said, pricing and marketing and how you're showing is super important. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you should expect to be on the market for 6, 7, 8 weeks either. If you do the right things and that right buyer is out there, it is possible for you to move quickly.
Yeah, no, well said. It's something you have to be aware of, but it doesn't mean that things are going to necessarily sit on the market for too long. And you need to also understand that from a buying perspective, because if you're looking to buy and you go, okay, you know what, on average, it takes 5 weeks for a place to sell, then yeah, maybe I can view it a couple times. But as Austin said, he had a townhouse in 8 or 9 days. They had an accepted offer. You may not have got to see that townhouse a couple times. So if it's something you like and the price is right, doesn't mean you, or don't be afraid to move on it if it makes sense for you. So that's my 2 cents on it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's really well put.
Okay,
Look at us
awesome.
agreeing on lots today, hey?
Yeah, I think it'd be more interesting if we disagreed on everything, but we'll do episodes where we can take a different perspective on things and obviously not clash heads, but just look at things from different angles. I think it'll add to it'll make for a more interesting conversation in some cases. Not to say that we're not interesting, but
we know that already. But anyway,
we don't need to tell ourselves that we live it every day. So,
yeah. Do you want to finish off with the yearly kind of stats recap then?
Yeah. Actually, let's do that because I guess this is our first yearly stats recap. Because believe it or not, guys, we've been doing this for more than a year now, so we actually have a full year to look back on. So yeah, let's do that. So I wouldn't say any of these stats are necessarily surprising. New listings saw a 1-year high, and there were a 10-year high. Sorry, I can't even type, guys. I got my notes incorrect. New listings saw a 10-year high, which again, not surprising. We saw a lot of inventory flood the market, and a 9% above the 10-year average. So no question, lots of inventory out there, lots of people listing their homes, and is that going to continue into 2025, Austin? What do you think? Are we going to see another high next year, or do you think things kind of even out? I don't know. That might be a hard prediction to make at this point.
Yeah, I think as much as we'll see people that need to have kind of two moves, I think that, like, if they plan on purchasing and selling, I think a lot of this will really affect on how many people feel confident to get into the market or purchase an additional property. So I think it just really comes down to supply and demand. Can we start to eat up some of that inventory that's available, so that we can start to see a little bit of upward pressure on prices because of that supply and demand. So it's tough to say. I mean, I personally think things will be more status quo, like similar to last year, maybe a slight increase like we talked about in our predictions episode. But yeah, it's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the opposite end of that. So the opposite end of listings are sales. Sales were the lowest that we've seen in 10 years. So we saw a 10-year high in listings and a 10-year low in sales. What does that mean? It means that we have lots of inventory, or we have lots of supply, not a lot of demand. And overall, that was 1% lower in sales compared to 2023, and 24% lower than the 10-year average. Again, that's not surprising. Sorry, that's not surprising, right? Like, we've talked about this all year. We've consistently seen that sales have been slow. And yeah, I don't know. What did you want to add to that? Sorry.
No, I think, when you expand out the sample size of that, when you're talking about 10-year averages, right? If we had average, 2020, 2021 was above average. To even things out, we're going to have a couple of years that are below average, and that's okay, right? When you expand out that sample size, I think in the grand scheme of things, there was some hotter years in real estate, and you're seeing some quote unquote colder ones. But again, we will return to that, par or that midline eventually. We're just kind of averaging things out, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's well put. Averages aren't because every year is the same. It's because you have years that are higher and you have years that are lower. So do I think that sales will be lower in 2025 than they were in 2024? I don't think so. I'm optimistic. I think sales will increase year over year. Do I think that we'll see sales in 2025 that are similar to what we saw in like 2021, or even if you go back as far as like 2018, I think was a pretty hot year? No, I don't. I think that would be catastrophic, quite frankly, and something quite severe would have to happen for us to see something like that happen. But I wouldn't be surprised if in 365 days, give or take a few days from now, we have this exact same call and we decide that, or we see that, sales did go up year over year. That wouldn't shock me.
Totally. I agree.
Yeah. So kind of bringing this back to the Fraser Valley a little bit more. Of course, these stats are all Fraser Valley based. So Surrey as a city made up over half of all the sales, which I read that stat and I was like, that seems like a lot. But then I was like, there's a lot of people in Surrey and there's a lot of homes in Surrey. Now, as we both know, Langley's been growing quite substantially. I think, if I'm not mistaken here, Langley made up about 25% of the remaining. And then actually, you know what? I might have it here. No, I don't. I think it was, Langley made up about 25%. Surrey made up about 50. And then I think the rest was just made up of the other areas, of course, that make up the Fraser Valley. Does that surprise you, that number? About 50% of sales were in Surrey?
No, I mean, I think geographically, I think it's just such a large city. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
It's a funny way to put it, but yeah, it's just so big, and especially the density increases that you're seeing with the more condos, more townhomes. Obviously, they have detached properties too. Surprise, surprise. But yeah, I think it's just the density and how big it is. I think is why you're seeing more people move out that way. And again, it's that next natural suburb of the Greater Vancouver region. So you're just going over the bridge. That doesn't surprise me at all.
No, it's huge. And I don't know, I think they're over 1 million people now, population wise. And yeah, like you said, it's growing. They now have their own police force, which we're not going to get into the politics of that, but they're growing rapidly. They'll continue to grow. And who knows, maybe they'll get their own sports team one day. They might become a big enough city to support something like that, which would be cool. So,
are you suggesting that that Surrey Super Arena that was proposed?
Not necessarily, but I mean, hey,
we won't get into that. We won't get
again.
Into
We're trying to avoid the politics of that. When we talk politics, we like to bring in people that are a little bit smarter than we are when it comes to these things, so that we're not talking.
And that's not hard.
No, it's really not.
Really
so, and that's not to take anything away from the guest. That's just saying that we are not the experts. But so pricing, comps and benchmark price, which Austin, I'll let you kind of just give the viewers a bit of a recap of what that is here in a second, was down 2% year over year. Now, okay, 2% decrease year over year. So let's say you had something that was $1 million, you lost, it went down 20 grand, right? So it's now 980. That's really not that big of a difference. 2%. I mean, sure, you'd like that 20 grand, assuming that you could sell your home for 20 grand more a year ago. But
you'd wanted 20 grand up as opposed to
right, exactly. But the one that jumps out to me here is that it was down 4% since March of 2024. So if we go back to what we were talking about before, where I said we've seen 9 straight drops, which puts us in March 2024, basically since the start of these 9 straight drops, it's dropped 4%. So overall, it's been only 2%, which means we had some up months in the first 3 months there, but then we saw a much more significant drop since March. So not to make anybody feel bad, but if you bought a home in March of 2024, hypothetically, it's worth 4% less than it is now. So that $1 million home is now worth 960 because you lost 40 grand. Again, obviously that doesn't mean anything definitively, because what somebody's willing to pay for something does not mean that's what you're going to get for it. Or sorry, what I'm trying to say is what somebody's willing to pay for something is ultimately what it's worth. It's not what these stats say. So real quick, because that was a bit of a tangent, benchmark price, what is that exactly? And then your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So benchmark price is basically, throwing everything in the blender and getting the average or the median, like the middle number of whatever is selling. As far as, what does that mean to me? When you think of all of the things that have been going on in the world in regards to inflation, prices of things, all of that kind of stuff, money being more expensive relatively than it was before to borrow, all that kind of stuff, you have seen with the Bank of Canada rate changes, the effects of the challenges in the economy. So when I see that, those prices are down 4%, and then you think back on, 2 50 basis point drops, a couple quarter points before that, not surprised at all. It's like, that's why they're doing the rate cuts, because there's challenges. It's people are having trouble affording things, and you're seeing that reflect through things like sale price, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And there's a few things I want to add. So first and foremost, we have 3 asset classes: detached, townhomes, and apartments. That 4% is now averaged across those classes. So some asset classes are going to have more of a decrease. Some are going to have less. Some might not have any. So that's something worth noting, because it's really a combination of all of those. And then the other side of that is the fact that, lost my train of thought. 4% is really not that much, to be honest with you. Like, it's, like I said before, maybe it's 40 grand on $1 million, but it's not crazy. And as we've talked about before, like, things will adjust in time. Like, you can't expect real estate to continue to grow consistently at a certain rate, or else there would be no market, because it would be too predictable. If you knew you could buy something and year over year you would earn 0.5 percentage point or 1%, then yeah, that's great. But it wouldn't be a there wouldn't be a market anymore. Like, it would be too predictable. So I remembered what I was going to say. The other thing I was going to say is, geez, I keep drawing a blank every time I think I want to come back to this. All right. What do you have to say to that? Sorry, I'm having a hard time here.
No, it's all good. I don't want to make this look like I was letting you drown there. I was just confirming and looking up, benchmark price and HPI price. So that's kind of consumer price index related and kind of more predictive of what a place is worth, as opposed to, median and average. Those are kind of more statistical data, as opposed to benchmark kind of does something with the data to predict. So yeah, just a little bit. I wanted to define that a little bit better.
Okay, awesome. No, I appreciate that. So what I was going to say is, we also live in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world. So that's worth noting, because of the fact that a 4% decrease, like I said, since March, doesn't mean that people can now afford these homes with so much more ease than they could before, right? Like, if we're talking about $100,000 homes, like, yeah, you only save 4 grand, but but again, we're talking about homes that cost $100,000 versus homes that cost $1 million, right? So that I think is important to note. That doesn't mean affordability is now all of a sudden shifted and now the average consumer can get into the market because, wow, prices are down 4% since March. We still have a lot of challenges. We still have, we're still hoping to see obviously rates get lower so that more people can get in the market. It's unlikely that we'll see prices, as I mentioned before, drop significantly. Like we're probably at a point now where prices will more or less stay around here, and over the next few years we'll probably see prices trend up because that's what real estate does. But yeah, I think that's worth noting. We still live in a very expensive place.
Very, very well put. Do you have anything else you want to add or chat about?
No, I don't think so. Actually, you know what? I will. Sorry. One quick plug. Not plug, just one quick thing. So the flipping tax went into effect January 1st. Really short. Basically, if you've owned a home for less than 2 years, you might have to pay a tax of up to 20% of the profit that you made on that home. What's funny about that is if you bought a home 2 years ago, you probably didn't make profit on it as of now, to be honest with you. Like, I don't want to say with 100% certainty, but if you bought a home at the end of 2022/early 2023, there's no guarantee it's worth more now than it was then. But the point of the matter is, if you are looking to sell your home and you've had it for less than 2 years, make sure you determine what your obligation could be if you have to pay that tax. And the most important thing I read about this is that you are fully responsible for sending in a document. And I'm sorry, I think it's called a BC flipping tax. It's like a bit of a mouthful. Like basically it's a BC flipping tax document, but it has to be filed within 90 days. So that's really important. And they're not going to come after you for that document until they realize you didn't file it. So, and it's completely separate from your income taxes. So just, that's kind of the one thing I wanted to point out here is make sure you do file that document if it's something that you have to pay.
And just to clarify things a little bit more on top of that, that is different. The BC flipping tax
correct.
Is different than the federal flipping tax.
That is correct, yeah.
So there's more than one that you have to be aware of if you sell within a certain amount of time. I know that was a subject at our sales meeting we had a chat about. But yeah, how about we just leave it at that?
Yeah, let's leave it there. The main thing is make sure you have people that can help you with these things. And Austin, that's you and I. So without further ado, thanks for listening, guys.
Sweet. Thank you guys again, and we'll see you next week.